Hey, this is Pops. If you don't have it yet, this is an important cleaning tool on many levels. Okay, I wanted to do this video here today for one main reason. I've already done one that's already uploading now. But I wanted to give you an idea because I've been a manager basher for so long, an idea of what a good manager is. I was given an example right out of college. Brockport Ford tractor, which turned into Ford something or other. The Ford division at the time bought the dealer out because the dealer ran off with the secretary. And both of them left their families behind, and just one day they walked in and the two were gone and said, "Have a nice life, guys." I guess a note or something was left behind. One of those things. But what we had was old Bob was a service manager there. He's probably what my age is now, in the early 60s. He says, "I'm just getting tired of this crap. I don't like sitting behind the desk either." But he says, "I've lost all the fun of working on these new tractors." Well, it was back then when everything was mechanical, but what was coming were hydraulics were starting to make a big change in differences. Oliver, Minneapolis, Moline, and White were making all being merged together in one great big masher, making quite a change. And old Bob was just like, "I'm just sick and tired of this stuff." He says, "I still like it. Come here, I'll show you something." I hadn't even started work yet, and in the back was this 20-foot long bench. They decided one day that the times then were slow to build a hydraulic bench for cylinders so they could pull the suckers apart on the loaders. They had a lot of them, bent rods and such. This says, as Bob put it, "I started looking pretty stupid. We're tying tractors together, pulling the things apart in the parking lot. Oil's going everywhere. These jokers don't care. I'm sick of having to clean it up." That was Bob. That was Bob's style. Bob was not one of those that was, PR type with the customers, but he knew the work. He knew what the guys were doing, and he had done the work long enough that for him to be service manager was key. It was key in a farm shop to keep the customers away from the mechanics sometimes, because they would come in rabid sometimes, and usually wrong. And Bob would have a way of calming them down that nobody else could. Gib would say, "I can't say anything to him." He says, "Bob will calm them right down, send them out the door." And he says, "They could be spitting bullets. When Bob gets through, they may still be spitting bullets, but they don't know what to say. So they go home." And he says, "I don't know how he does it." Well, Bob was a smart man at the time, too. But he was also one that life was fun. We were walking out to the parking lot one day, and he says, "I suspect you're one of those that starts your car up and lets it warm up before you take off." I said, "Well, not a lot, but yeah, a little bit. I don't think it needs to warm up much in this weather. But you do wait for the oil light to go out, don't you?" "Well, yeah, why?" He says, "I don't. I fire my car up, and if I'm not in gear moving before that oil light's out, I suspect I'm moving too slow. I want to go home at the end of the day." This 20-year-old kid learning skills coming up from an abused home. Bob was filling in the blanks. Bob would have been one of those people that if you're going to start social services, he'd have been one of the reluctant people that he would have made social services work. Not be abusive, misusive, and communist. He would have made it work. "You use your seatbelt all the time?" I said, "Usually, but not always." "Why is that?" It's because it's only a lap belt. That can cause as much harm as good. He says, "They do, and I hate the things. If I'm going to hit something, I want to hit it. Hit it full on. I don't want to be folded up." Well, when working on equipment, he told me afterwards, he comes out and I'm standing there and he looks and says, "I see you found out how that air ratchet works, don't you? Now you know why people don't use it." Gibb had mentioned he had an air ratchet. Nobody else did. They all hated him. A lot of the guys there hated their air tools until they started getting around 40. When they were on the road, they didn't have anything to run the air tool. So it was a different story. But I'd smash my knuckles against the concrete or the pavement that was out there, and it was bleeding and hurting. And he saw it on my face. Made sure to come over and tell me about it. Other guy said, Bob come out and told you about the story of the air ratchet, didn't he? But he didn't tell me his story about it. Oh, yeah. But Bob was always there to tell you. He says, well, I'm going to tell you something Gib isn't going to tell you about that. When you're done, you got everything all nice and tight, you go back over and tighten it again. He says, if a bolt doesn't break, you didn't tighten it enough. I said, yeah, but if it stretches, that's a good point. All right, just make sure they're all good and tight. German torque, as they called it. Off he went. One day he told me something to do on a hydraulic system. And it was a standard one I'd done before. Yeah, I know how to do this. You make your measurements, put it on, and send it away. But I said, the measurements never line up, according to the book. Why not? They're supposed to. How else is it going to work? I don't know. But I said, mine wouldn't come close. I did another one. It didn't come close. I said, I'll try this one. It didn't come close, but I followed the instructions. Test it with air. I said, it's not going to work. What do you mean? I said, hydraulics stop. Pneumatics don't. Just try it anyway. Piston blew out. Seals are out. I'm poking the seals back in, trying to save them, get it in there. Hours later, I mean, I can't remember, 3 hours later, I think it was, something, 4. I said, Bob, it can't work. And the other guys tried talking him down. Bob comes over later, and he says, the boys tell me I'm sending you on a goose chase. And I said, what do you mean? He says, pneumatics isn't going to work. It'll blow the piston out. I said, it already has 4 or 5 times. Were you able to save it and put it back in? I said, well, yeah, because I tried to stop before it got there. It's just, pneumatics isn't like hydraulics. It doesn't just stop. I said, no, it doesn't. He said, that's funny. You argued with me about that when we started, didn't you? I said, well, I tried to, but, you said, well, you argued with me, gave me the point, and then you went and did what I told you to do anyway. Why is that? Well, because you told me to. Maybe I'm wrong. I think you've done us a service on 2 levels. I just wish you hadn't listened to me in the first place. But then again, you're the younger guy. I told you to do it, and you did it. He says, that's pretty good, too. Off he walked. Bob listened every time. He listened to the people. You tried to tell him, and he'd come back, and suddenly the light would turn on, and he'd begin to understand. The shop, the guys didn't fight a lot either about anything. Every once in a while, you'd hear some yelling, but usually it was started out as, yeah, they're fighting each other, but it's generally like they're trying to make some humor out of it. Let's straighten this out before everything turns into a disaster kind of thing. And Bob sat there with the customer, and the customer's furious about his bill. He says, I'm a mechanic too. He says, then what did you bring it here for? If it's that simple and you're a mechanic, well, I don't know how to do this. He says, well, we have the manpower here, and this young gentleman here has done this before. He says, if that doesn't work, you're going to bring it back, aren't you? You better believe I am for that kind of money. He says, well, good. Why don't you put that on and tell me how it is going to work? He says, when you pay your bill, something goes wrong, we have to fix it, don't we? Well, a while later, the guy comes back another day or something later, and he says, those hydraulics have never worked that well, ever. I can't believe it. He says, you think you spent your money quite well? Yes, I do. Off the guy walked. Bob didn't come back at me and have me explain to the customer what was going on. He didn't have me explain to the customer or in the write-up what the problem was. There was no extra explanations or anything else. Now you say, well, you should have done that anyway. But that's not how management has worked since that time ever. When something went wrong and you followed directions, they would scream at you for not unfollowing directions. You can warn them till you're green in the face. And there are times that you get in your career that if they give you bad directions, only a fool follows them when you know they're wrong. Well, in Bob's case, when the guys didn't follow what he wanted done, we went into the other category where Bob says, I can tell them what to do, but if they don't like it, they aren't going to do it. And I said, really? Yes, because they're old enough to know better. And he walked off. He says, as screwy as these guys are, you can learn a lot from them. He says, I'm still learning too, but I'll never let them know. And off Bob went. Why? Because I was the young guy. Nobody's going to believe anything I say. And one day we're sitting there in the break room and something came out that was the most unique thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And I've never heard it since in any shop ever, including those that think they operate perfectly and pristine like Anderson Equipment, Syracuse, New York. or half the shop is nothing but a bunch of worthless, time-sucking jackasses taking a check home, and the other side knows what they're doing, but there's always some moron in the office that tries to tell them how to do it and has no clue and has never done it in their life. Okay? This was different. One day we sat there and said, Bob's the best service manager we've ever had. Don't you ever dare tell him. I started laughing. One guy looked at me and said, what are you laughing about? And he said, well, Bob says you guys are the most screwed up people he's ever seen in his life. He's never worked for better mechanics. Don't you ever tell him. They lost it laughing at Bob. What are you guys laughing about anyway? Nothing. Just keep your deafness in the office. Well, keep it down there. I'm trying to get some work done in here. That was the first shop experience I ever had, and I've never had any close to it since. I came close to developing that. But the problem is that people get scared when the shop is something where camaraderie actually works. But the problem is you're working with people that have hated each other for so many years that the idea of working together, yeah. Worked in too many shops where management comes out and actually pits people in the shop against each other, thinking that what it is actually incentive. And then they have each one of them doing their own thing, listening only to them. And what it is a narcissism that's so deep and filthy, it ruins shops, ruins customer service, and ruins the atmosphere between management and the worker. And always out of that develops one brown noser who shoots his mouth off and talks to the boss about how everybody else should do something, and ends up the little shop squealer who may or may not even be the shop foreman. And the shop foreman is one who's never going to be able to meet time, ever. But management expects them to because you've had years' experience. Well, yeah, but I have to help that guy, and that guy so you can do your paperwork. So I shouldn't affect your time. So how many times do you want me to clock on and off the job? And management always, 100% of the time, in the last 43 years, has always forgotten to allow the shop foreman free rein. In other words, no time clock per job. The job's already written, roughly how much it's going to be. And the foreman is allowed to break off and do whatever he needs to do to assist the others while he's still doing his own work, which may be a hydraulic cylinder rebuild, small stuff. It might be assisting another one, troubleshooting a hydraulic pump or a fuel system, because they're quite intricate anymore. And teaching a younger one how to read the codes. So there might be 15 codes, and only 2 of them relevant. And junior needs to know that. And the foreman's the guy that's going to know that, not the shop service manager. Back in my day, when there's 3 of us in the shop, a truck driver and a shop service manager, that was a different story. The same applies today, but the same thing, the smaller the shop, it seems to get worse. Even when it's a business maintenance shop, such as in a construction or truck outfit, where the shop itself isn't there to make money, it's there to keep the fleet moving. Even there, it's less, because it's important to keep the fleet moving. And the time clock doesn't seem to matter. It's not time clock per job to charge out. It's time clock to keep the piece moving. And they will accept sometimes that the job has to stop here for certain reasons. But somehow in a paying shop, the foreman and sometimes even the service managers acting as foreman gets pinched into those things where people make demands that are unrealistic. They know it, but they think making unrealistic demands means that they're going to bring somebody up to a level. And 3/4 of the time, it doesn't bring them to a level. It puts them down here where they get apathetic, because they know it doesn't matter what happens, nobody's ever going to be satisfied. They don't even need to hear an attaboy. They don't need any of that. They don't even need, in a male-dominated world, they don't even need a pat on the back. All they need to know is the customer was satisfied. All they need to know is the job went well. All they need to know is in the end result, they did what they were supposed to do, what they needed to do to get the job done. Men aren't those that need that pat on the back. If they get it, you'll give them a real boost to keep them there longer. But it's not absolutely necessary, because once you're in the position of a technician, once you get 2 or 3 years into a shop, you get to a point where you know what your job is, you know what you've done, you have confidence or you don't. And that can change everything that you've done. What impressed them more than anything else in my first job He said, "Can you do a clutch in that 4000? It's pretty intricate." I said, "Yeah, I can. Done a few tractors. Not a lot, but a few. It's not that much different than my little 650 Ford." He looked at me. 650 is a lot older. Yeah, but still a clutch. So I tore it apart, did what he wanted, put it back together. I said, "Bob, we should have." He says, "It'll still work fine for this guy. He's not going to want his flywheel turned." We should have turned the flywheel. We actually took corners off the clutch plate so that it would full face fit. And half the clutch's life was gone because the flywheel was worn, the type of clutch it was. I tried to warn him, put it together. He said, "It doesn't work perfect, but it does what I wanted it to do. So you did it right again. My way, not the right way." Well, okay. Those are the type of things in a shop that make the biggest difference for somebody. The next time you go to do the clutch job and you warn him that it's not going to work properly, and he says that's acceptable, then any technician may let it go because someone's going to take responsibility for the decision they made. Now, when I worked at Randall Implement over there, Bob Freeman would take no responsibility for anything because before you even saw the job in the shop, he already lied to the customer over 3/4 of the time. Blew up some great big huge story of what he was going to do, and in some cases the moron was stupid enough to give an estimate. And then give him a break on the estimate, and then have the thing come in and you find out what the actual problem is. He blows a gasket. Screaming and yelling, uncontrolled, hollering and whooping and threatening people. And it was constant. And it was so bad that at one point he ended up getting bought out with a hostile takeover and tossed out in the street. So I was told by people that were involved in the story. So management can vary drastically. But one of the things I will recommend is if you are a business owner, the only way being a service manager works is if all you do is repair. You're not selling parts, you're not selling machines or anything else. You're the business owner. You've got to stay out of the service department. You cannot be in the service department. You're going to have your head in too many places to properly run that department. It's too technical. It's not necessarily fast paced, but it's too technical. And I know of no one that owns a business unless it has been a direct servicing mechanic style technician business. That's all it is, a service department. Then the management has worked out okay if they take these other things into consideration, the people they're working with. And one of them is the skills that each one has. Now, when I worked at that first shop, Jim Richards can do just about anything, but if there was hydraulics or welding involved, he's your man. Bud, he could do just about anything, but you want him to tear a transmission apart and fling it back together, or some stupid little leak or whatever else that somebody else can't figure, Bud's probably going to come up with a solution for some oddball stuff. The two guys together could figure something out better than anybody else I'd ever seen, and they were both as Yankee redneck as you could get. And the service manager took that into consideration when he worked with him, and he parsed out the jobs accordingly. Each one of them enjoyed certain particular types of job. One guy loved being on the road. The other one loved being in the shop with a welding stick in his hand. And Bob took those things into consideration when I came in. Then they would use those two guys to teach me those different skills that they had. Jim was an engine freak. He loved going through engines and gutting them and opening the things up and turbocharging and playing with kits and nuts. Bud, no. I'll go out and turn the smoke up on your tractor, and he'll do some quick figuring out that other people wouldn't. And Bob knew that. And if you're a service manager involved in the business, you forget that with your people in the shop. Same in parts. But parts is closer. It's a sales thing. And an owner can sit there and work some things out here. But then again, if you're going to be specific in parts, you better not stick your nose too much into sales and let your boys run free. You say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, now you're at the point where you're going to be up here, a split manager. Well, then you need people involved in it, even in parts. That if you have one parts guy, that he stops in and you talk with him once in a while and see what's going on. Ride around with your salesman once in a while to see what's going on. And then get into the service guy in the service department and ask him what he's got. And just find out what's going on in the shop once in a while and walk away from all of it. This week, you're going to hang around and figure parts out. Maybe what you're doing is, as the owner, your stuff is all set in place. The bills are paid. That's all taken care of. Now you sit in parts and you're boxing things up to ship. So you understand how that part of the department works. Maybe in the service department, you're going to go out and ride with one of the technicians. Or you'll handle the paperwork so the service manager can ride with a technician and get out on the road. So you understand the workings of each department. It's critical, more so than you could ever know. But any way possible, the owner should not be directly involved in any one of the three. Now, if you are in the place where there's a service and parts only, you not have a equipment sales side of it, then I'd put you in parts and let somebody run service, because then you're involved in both continuously, and that will work out very well. So just some suggestions that I've seen over the last 43 years, 40 some years of working on. But specifically in the service department, how to be a proper manager is to take in consideration the decisions you've made, the decisions you've made and recorded, especially in a shop with multiple people. Anything over 2 people, make sure you write things down either on your computer or on the work order, where he has a work order, the serviceman, and you have a work order. Yes, and pinned to the wall for each job. Not stuck in a file, have a massive wall with all of this up there. You could do your dry erase board, but somebody usually comes in and wipes it. And you've got the notes for each individual job that you wrote down after talking with a mechanic as things go on. When the customer calls in, you're not running in the shop asking a stupid question. You're looking at them and say, let me check the work order I have here. I took notes this morning of where that mechanic was. He's at this level. Or we're waiting for parts. Or we know such, and you have it written down on that work order that's your work order, your notes, that may or may not be stored later or tossed out. That way he's still working. You have an idea what's going on. When the customer asks a question, you're not fumbling. And you cannot believe the massive difference it makes with a customer. You don't even have to be a competent manager in the shop. But if you have the information as far as the customer is concerned, you give the customer confidence that you've written down what the mechanic is doing, then you have an idea of what's going on there and able to explain it to the customer, then you've made a barrier where the customer doesn't worry about what the mechanic's doing, because they know you know what the mechanic is doing. Even if you don't understand it, you've got it written down. You have answers. And the confidence that builds is astronomical. We've had 2 of them that the customer said, he doesn't know a lot about this stuff, does he? I said, no, but he usually works pretty hard to go figure it out. I noticed that in the phone. He said he'd get back to me, and he did. He's still dumber than a box of rocks. But boy, did he put an effort in. The confidence the customer had at that point says, and you get along with him? Yep. Just like I told you, he doesn't know a lot, but he's learning. And he's working hard to learn. Confidence was massive for somebody who was an ignorant in the field. It makes a difference. That's all I can tell you. Peace out. 23 minutes, 25 seconds. See ya.